So, we all know, or have at least seen pictures of, the pyramids, mummies, the mask of Tutankhamun, the colossal statues and temples of pharaohs like Ramesses II, and many of the other wonders that we closely associate with ancient Egypt. But what about the time before all that? What about the people who laid the foundations of what we today recognize as Egyptian civilization? For a long time, their story was completely unknown. But that all changed in the 1880s with British archaeologist William Matthew Flinders Petrie. At the time, the origins and early history of Egyptian civilization were still largely speculative. Egyptologists knew of Egypt's dynasties from written records, thanks to ancient historians like Manetho, but what came before them was unknown. According to Petrie himself,
the first three dynasties are a blank, so far as monuments are concerned. They are as purely on a literary basis as the kings of Rome or the primeval kings of Ireland.
In fact, early findings in Egypt led Petrie and others to initially conclude that the country's earliest known rulers may have come from elsewhere. For example, the June 1923 edition of the London Illustrated News featured an article on Petrie's recent lecture about a remarkable object known as the Gebel el-Arak knife. What made this knife so unique was the distinctly Mesopotamian imagery carved into its ivory handle, which reignited debates about early cultural connections between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Petrie interpreted such artifacts as evidence for what became known as the dynastic race theory, which suggested that the rise of dynastic Egypt, marked by political unification, writing, and kingship, was the byproduct of an invasion or migration of a foreign people from Mesopotamia. The dynastic race theory has since been largely discredited. Historians now believe that native Egyptian ingenuity was likely sparked by contact with Mesopotamia and led to a period of intense creativity and innovation, rather than outsiders arriving in Egypt and imposing their culture and technology on the locals. That said, we owe much of the discovery and understanding of pre-dynastic Egypt to Petrie's meticulous methods of archaeological excavation. He insisted on recording even the most modest objects, trained skilled workmen to handle delicate finds, and developed structured excavation practices. His meticulous work revealed Egypt's earliest history and ensured that the dawn of its civilization was no longer hidden from view. He is, without a doubt, one of the founders of scientific archaeology. But let's get back to the land and earliest peoples of Egypt. To truly understand how ancient Egyptian civilization arose, we have to take a look at its very beginning, a time when the country's geography and climate shaped the development of its earliest cultures. The agricultural revolution reached Egypt significantly later than the neighboring Levant, as the abundance of wild resources in the Nile Valley allowed people there to rely on hunting, fishing, and foraging for much longer. In the 1920s, a vast number of ancient jars and storage bins were unearthed in the Fayum region. Made of mud plaster and lined with woven baskets, these bins contained traces of wheat, barley, and other grains, clear evidence that the inhabitants had shifted from a nomadic lifestyle to one rooted in farming. Though the Fayum lay away from the Nile's banks, it still benefited from the river's annual flood, as waters would push through a narrow breach in the western cliffs and deposit fertile silt across the low-lying plain. The communities that emerged here during the 5th millennium BC were simple. Many were likely only semi-permanent, but they had unmistakably embraced farming. The adoption of agriculture unfolded differently in Upper and Lower Egypt. In the northern Nile Delta, or Lower Egypt, the earliest fully Neolithic cultures began adopting a sedentary lifestyle by the mid-6th millennium BC, much like their neighbors in the Levant. They built permanent villages and relied heavily on the cereals they cultivated. One of the earliest known sites, Merimde Beni Salama, set on a low terrace along the western edge of the delta, reveals settlement layers spanning 5 distinct phases between 5000 and 4100 BC. Merimde's economy combined agriculture and animal husbandry, especially sheep, cattle, and pigs, with fishing and hunting. It also offers the earliest evidence of dog domestication in Egypt. The site's most striking discovery, however, is a terracotta head of a human figure, thought by some to be the earliest known sculpture of a human head. Tiny holes around its face suggest that feathers may once have been attached to it, and a hole at the base may have allowed it to be mounted on a peg or pole. As for whom, or what it depicts, archaeologists remain unsure. It could have represented a man, but perhaps also a deity or some magical figure. The real roots of Egypt's pharaonic civilization, as it's called, lie in Upper Egypt. The earliest fully Neolithic culture here was the Badarian culture. Emerging around 4500 to 4000 BC and first identified near the village of el-Badari in central Egypt, the people of the Badarian culture appear to have been fairly mobile, cultivating wheat and barley while also gathering wild fruits and herbs. Their graves reveal the first sign of a developed funerary tradition, what would later become a defining feature of ancient Egyptian culture. These are the earliest formal cemeteries in Egypt's archaeological record, and mark a profound shift in how people related to both the landscape and the material world around them. The dead were carefully placed in crouched positions on reed mats, surrounded by everyday objects, such as pottery vessels, bone tools, ivory ornaments, thin strips of copper, and stone pallets. The people of the Badarian culture were also the first known to craft pallets from mudstone for grinding pigments, a practice that would continue for centuries. In daily life, they used large, coarse clay vessels, but their graves also contained remarkably fine ceramics, red or brown polished pottery with a distinctive blackened rim, created through a special firing technique. These early Badarian ceramics are among the finest ever produced, showing that Egyptian craftspeople had achieved an impressive level of technical skill right from the start. A few centuries later, the Naqada culture rose out of this Badarian foundation and transformed these early traditions into something far more ambitious. The Naqada culture is arguably the most important prehistoric culture of Upper Egypt, and represents a period of profound change that can be traced almost without interruption to the founding of the Egyptian state. The core area of the Naqada culture lay in Upper Egypt, a region much richer in natural resources than the northern delta. The ancient name of Naqada was Nubt, meaning city of gold. The first phase of this period, known as Naqada I, lasted from around 3800 to 3550 BC and built on Badarian foundations, but at a higher level of sophistication. Centered in a region later sacred to the gods Horus and Seth, the people of the Naqada culture inaugurated river travel on the Nile with their reed boats, linking communities along the river in ways that would shape Egypt's future political unity. Their dead were buried in simple oval pits, lying in a contracted position on their left side, head to the south and facing west. They were often wrapped in basketry mats or resin-soaked linen and buried with grave goods, stone and pottery vessels, cosmetic and quartz beads, flint and obsidian tools, and mineral pigments like galena and malachite. What's more interesting, though, at least for me, is that these materials hint had wide-reaching trade networks. Obsidian from Ethiopia, ores from nearby mountain ranges as far as the Sinai, and shells from the Red Sea. The early Naqada period also saw the first clear signs of Egyptian draftsmanship, with early depictions of boats, animals, and landscapes appearing on pottery. Naqada II, from roughly 3550 to 3200 BC, followed naturally from this base, but shows a leap in both complexity and outside influence, which seems to have energized creativity and accelerated social development. Stone vessel carving became a major industry, while precious metals like gold appear more often. Naqada II communities expanded northward, establishing sites in Lower Egypt, possibly as traders or colonists seeking direct control over lucrative Mediterranean trade routes. The rise of large wooden boats helped extend their reach and cement their control along the Nile. By the Naqada III phase, from about 3200 to 2900 BC, and often called the Proto-Dynastic period, Egypt was on the brink of political unification. Power began to concentrate in emerging urban centers like Hierakonpolis and Abydos. Long-distance exchange intensified, manufactured goods proliferated, and wealth became increasingly concentrated in the hands of local elites. This concentration of power and control over resources set the stage for something entirely new in Egypt's history: the rise of kingship and the unification of the Nile Valley under a single ruler. As society became more complex, a powerful elite class began to emerge. This growing social divide is best revealed through the way people were buried. While most individuals continued to be laid to rest in simple pits, the burials of a select few became far more elaborate. The pits for these individuals grew larger and rectangular, their walls sometimes lined with masonry or reinforced with wooden planks. Side chambers were added to hold grave goods, which became increasingly extensive. Over time, distinctions between burials grew more pronounced, reflecting clear differences in wealth and status among the living. A remarkable discovery gives us a closer look at the role of this emerging elite. The famous painted tomb of Hierakonpolis, also known as Tomb 100. Dating between 3500 and 3200 BC, this large rectangular pit is unique for the painted plaster that still lines its burial chamber. The main frieze runs across 3 adjacent walls, depicting scenes of hunting, sailing, and combat. One striking scene shows a man holding 2 lions with his bare hands, a motif scholars interpret as a symbol of leadership. This master of animals motif was also common in Mesopotamia at the time and appears on the carved handle of the el-Arak knife we looked at earlier. Another powerful image shows a man smashing the skulls of 3 enemies with a mace. This smiting of the foes motif would be endlessly repeated in reliefs and paintings of victorious kings throughout ancient Egyptian history. The distribution of elite cemeteries shows that the Naqada culture was not a single unified political entity, but rather a collection of at least 3 or 4 rival proto-states. Unification was not a sudden event, but the culmination of centuries of cultural fusion, competition, and the eventual political dominance of a single power, namely the kingdom founded by the ruler later known to the Egyptians as Menes, but whom most Egyptologists identify as the archaeologically attested Narmer. From scattered village communities to one of the most magnificent and powerful civilizations of all time, the rise of ancient Egypt is nothing short of extraordinary. And, as most of you already know, I have a lot more on the history of ancient Egypt coming up. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching. I'd also like to thank the channel's patrons for making videos like this possible. These include, but are certainly not limited to, GrandKick69, Yap de Graaf, Pasta Frola, Michael Lewis, Daniel Allen, Danny Van Eck, Wenix TV, Robert Morgan, Strobex, Frank, Tim Lane, Sebastian Hurtado Correa, Michael Trudell, Leader Titan, Micah G, John Scarberry, Andrew Bomer, Connor Dolson, Krish, Ben Van Rijsvik, David R., Stephen Ball, Gabe, Monty Grimes, Franz Robbins, Cyrus Smear, Dianastra, Nimrod Nir, Hypnosen, Brendan Redmond, Faridun Dadachanji, Jimmy Darawala, Anahida Debu, Gulistan Debu, Sher Kam, Farhad Kama, and all of the channel's patrons on Patreon for helping to support this and all future content. Check out the benefits to being a Patreon member, and if you'd like to join, feel free to click the link in the video description. You can also follow History with Sai on Instagram, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter, as well as continue to listen to special audio programs on the History with Sai podcast. Thanks again, and stay safe.